off, and it's pretty smart thing to do. The other thing to do, we often see people who do, they will do a deed to loved ones and reserve a life estate. And that is another smart thing to do, because what you're doing is, in essence, if you do a deed to your loved ones and you reserve a life estate, that life estate cannot be terminated. It's not like your family members can come in and throw you out of the property. I mean, the property, you're entitled to that property for the remainder of your life, and it can't be abandoned. Even if you were to have to be put in a convalescent home, there's no abandonment of that interest. And again, it's a good tool to protect your property against those federal liens that come in, federal and state liens that can come in. And we see people doing that. So there's some simple things that you can do to protect your assets, but certainly, we see too often people waiting to the last minute and to try to do these things, and it doesn't work very well. And usually it's far more expensive. There are some things that top-notch estate planning attorneys can do in the event that you get caught in a 5-year window period. In the event that you do get those liens put on you, there are some things that the estate planning attorneys can do after the fact. But I'm telling you, they're very expensive. It's a very complex thing, and it usually takes an attorney that's got a really high specialty in that area to try to avoid some of the liens and ramifications of not pre-planning. And it turns out that that's about as expensive, more expensive than if you would have done it in the very beginning. I mean, there are some measures that you can take, but they're extremely expensive and very complex. They have to put property in certain trusts, and it has to stay there for a period of time. And it's just a minefield that you don't want to walk. So the pre-planning is certainly by far the best that you can do.
I was going to ask you to address putting your estate in trust, like a revocable trust, or.
And you can. The trusts are good vehicles. The only thing you have to keep out with the trust is, and that's, remember I was telling you, it's kind of like, I call it a tickler system. When you have property in a trust, though, you've got to realize that just every so many years, the federal tax code changes with its treatment of trust. So, in other words, the amount that can be given per year might change, the number of parties, how people participate in a trust. But trusts generally are the way that you do the estate planning, the pre-planning. And to be honest with you, trust can oftentimes incorporate the vehicles I just told you about. It can incorporate the inter vivos gifts where you've reserved the life estate. You can do a trust like that. And also, the good thing about the trust is that your heirs can also avoid some of the harsh tax consequences through the trust that they would normally get if it was just a purely inter vivos gift. Rather than just giving it to them, if it was given in a trust, then they don't suffer the tax consequences. So the trust is good. They've got both the revocable and irrevocable, and depending on your circumstances, you would have to go to an estate planning attorney to find out what's best for you. But it is, I just hate to see, I don't know, I'd hate to guess how many liens are filed in Superior Court in Fannin County on individuals' properties that are against, with federal and state Medicaid and Medicare liens. I mean, it's just sad. It's just hard to believe that, I was joking with somebody one time, and it really wasn't a joke, but I was just thinking, man, if they foreclosed on all the liens at once, I mean, the government would all of a sudden own a whole lot of property. They tend not to do that as much, and most times they negotiate it down. That's true. They're not the Gestapo. They don't come in and usually foreclose on you and do that. But they usually do require some payment. If someone does sell the property, they usually do. I mean, they usually compromise those claims, but still, I mean, just think you're compromising claim on property that you've already paid in all your life for Social Security. You've worked as hard as you can. Now you're having to compromise with somebody not to take your property. That's not a good compromise. I don't call that a compromise. That's being held hostage. That's hostage negotiation is not good when it's your property and you've earned it and worked hard all your life for it. But it is paramount to do that, and we see it a lot. And unfortunately, we've seen families that had just huge tracts of land and that have worked night and day to preserve that. and and unfortunately, they've culminated in liens on their property. And like I said, the part I don't like is that there's no accounting for the amount you pay in. I know this is going to be on YouTube. I'll probably get shot for saying this one, but here's what I don't like is the fact that in the system, and I think everybody in here has probably gotten a report from a government report that tells you how much you've paid in to your Social Security and how much you're getting back out of it. But under these, whether it's a medical lien placed on Medicaid and Medicare, what gets me is you don't get the full benefit of that amount that you paid in. And I for the life of me, I can't figure out why, if they can give you an accounting and you can go down to your mailbox and you can pick that number up and say, hey, I paid in this much. Why don't I get credit for that? Now the answer to that question is above my pay grade. I'm telling you that now, but I just can't, and I haven't seen one politician pick that up, but I just don't see how that's, maybe Trump will. I'll email him that one. But I just don't see how, I just don't really see how that's equitable for people that have paid into that system, because they know how much you've paid in, and but it's a terrible circumstance people find themselves in. But you have to, I'm telling you, you have to protect yourself. I will say this, and I don't have a crystal ball, but I would say with the healthcare system moving the way that it's moving, with the, I guess we call it Obamacare, with this Obamacare structure, especially on younger people, the government tends to duplicate what they've done in the past. In other words, you can predict what they'll do because they don't like to change the system very much. And what's scary about that system is you just wonder right now that people that can't make their premium payments, right now what they're doing is they're saying, well, if you don't make your premium payments, we're either going to penalize you or we're going to go out there and grab your tax return. Well, isn't that where we were with these Medicaid and Medicare liens 20 years ago? So in the future, I'm afraid that even the younger people, if they don't take heed and do the things I'm telling you about, that's what they're going to find out too, is that they'll get it one way or the other. And if it may be where a 40-year-old goes out and has this huge medical bill. I think sometimes there's a good chance that property that they own later in life may have liens on them. I mean, I think it's headed that way. It's not a radical thought, because if you look at what's happened in the last 20 years, I don't think your generation, when you were in school, would have dreamed that this could be. That if you were hear me speak today and say, hey, if you were to go to a nursing home, you'd have to forfeit your CDs and put a lien on your house, and they would credit you with so much on Social Security and take the balance. I don't think anybody would have believed that, but it's a reality. So, so I'm telling you, it's really good to don't be asleep at the wheel, and protect what you have, and protect your families, and protect what you've worked for all these years, and we've got to do that. And again, it's part of our system is a little bit socialized. And again, that saying, it works, it looks good, it sounds good, and you hear politicians talk about it, but it works good till the socialistic system runs out of other people's money, and then that's what's going to happen to Social Security. That's what's going to happen to Medicaid and Medicare. They're running out of other people's money, and that's your money. So don't you run out of it. You keep it, and you protect that interest, and it can be done. And this generation has been self-reliant, and I know you'll do that. But any other questions about the estate planning?
Sure, I got a question. How far down the line can you determine what happens? For instance, if you create a trust for your offspring, but in the event when the time comes, if they're no longer living, can you decree where it goes from that point on?
Yes, you can. All right, and I think this is your question. Your question is, say you set out a trust and you've got 5 living children, and in that trust you have certain disbursements. What you can do is you can do contingent disbursements. In other words, if something were to happen to one of the children, then there can be a contingency in there where the trust would deviate and say it would be divided among the 4, or that person's heirs. The trust are usually incorporated in a will. Usually most of them will have those provisions in them. For instance, if you had 5 children, one deceases and they had children, then what it would do is pass to those kids. If a person was deceased without any children, it could go to the 4.
Is some of that automatic?
No, it'd be automatic. You could do that. You could actually structure your trust that way.
And what happens if the spouse survives? What part do they play then? An in-law that's married to the child. What part do they play? They're going to inherit what that child had.
Okay, I got you. Yeah, that's all right. You can do it. You can do that. It's the same as we don't have the simultaneous death provisions in wills, and we had one not long ago that they did not do this, and there is a provision, and once again it defaults to Georgia law, but that is mom and dad have a will, and the will says, well, in case I die, it defaults to you, and if you die, it defaults to me. But unfortunately, these 2 people deceased at the same time, and so that made it a little complicated because here it was simultaneous, and it wasn't even an accident either. It was literally one had to drop dead, and the other one didn't even make it home. I guess it was being distraught, and it made it complicated. And there is a provision in Georgia law that says that one second is presumed. The other person survives the other one, and there is technically a surviving person. The bad thing is the person that survived by 1 second may not be advantageous for that person to have done that because of the way that the state's set up. So we did it the other way because I made the presumption about when that person passed away, and we did it so it benefited the state a little bit better. And I'm on camera when I said that, but that's what we did. But we can do that though. I mean, that was discretionary about who did. But again, it's not fair. It's not fair because you know what the people wanted. You know that the people wanted their kids protected, and you know that they wanted their kids to inherit what they had worked for. So my ruling is that the general intent of the parties was carried out by it working this way, and it worked that way. But you're right. In those trusts, you've got to put provisions that if you've got to make an assumption in there, if a person were to predecease me, then this is the way it goes. If I predecease that person, it goes a certain way. The complex thing we have, and I bet y'all can guess this, but again, your generation doesn't have as many issues with it as the generations that followed you, and that was the blended families. Oh my gosh. You're talking about, I need a blackboard in my office. You're talking about a tree. But we do. It's not uncommon now. We have blended families. You'll have father comes in the scene. He's got 3 children. Mother brings in 3 children, and they get married and have to. And then she passes away or he passes away, and then they come to me, and I'm like, let me get my chalkboard because this is gonna be complicated. But again, it's exactly what you were saying with the trust. Usually that is perfect for a trust. That situation, that's when I want to open that will up and see a trust, because that is the perfect solution for that. Because, and oftentimes you'll see that person, just not to blow y'all's mind, but just think about this. Mom comes in, has 3 kids, dad has 3 kids, but guess what? They live long enough, they got grandkids. And then, but of course the 2 had kids together and they have grandkids, so you've got 3 sets. And it can get pretty complicated. And so in those situations, that trust is a wonderful mechanism, because the trust, in other words, you can have a will, and then that you can have a trust that separates, for instance, the property that maybe the father or the mother brought in from their respective families. I mean, they may live on one parcel of land, but then own another parcel of land, oftentimes in another state. We see that. I don't want to get into that because that really complicates it. But they may have a parcel that they got from their own family. So, but those trust provisions are wonderful for that, because it separates out in the event. I've got 3 kids. I come into the marriage. The kids' grandparents are truly these people. This is their inheritance. This is their lineage, and then those children would take from that portion of the estate and make it definable. But believe it or not, we have people come in and die intestate like that. And then that's when it's terrible. I mean, they die intestate with that problem. It becomes a math problem. I'm telling you what, it is complicated. And in certain circumstances, you know, we can't, depending on which spouse dies first, it can really have bad ramifications on the way that the property is distributed. Some people may be getting assets they shouldn't get, and others may not get enough. But then again, that's me making a decision, and all I can do is just go by the Georgia Code. And I never like doing that, because I'm telling you what, they don't write it that well. Those legislators, they're going to watch this video and get me. But I mean, but they don't, you know, I mean, it's not that well done. Believe me, with the creativity and the intelligence and the education and life experience that you have, you will always do a better job. I guarantee, trust yourself. You will do a better job than throwing it into a pot and letting politicians decide which way that your assets should go. You will trump them every single time, because that's the way this country was built.